Good evening, and welcome to another episode of Apolitically Incorrect Guyana. My name is Kian Jabour, and as usual, I am your host this evening. Well, last week we had such a wonderful conversation with a very special guest, and we got some very interesting insight on a few topics that I think are very critical to Guyana's current state of affairs, and even down to past and, more importantly, present situations. So what I've done is I've asked for one of Guyana's favorite commentaries and politicians to discuss a little bit more detail. So once again, I've asked Mr. Timothy Jonas, SC, Senior Counsel, to join us this evening once again, and we are going to have a very interesting chat because so much has happened in Guyana over the past week. All right, we've seen some things unfold that were reoccurring. We've seen some new issues arise, and then some solutions that have been presented to us. So I like to stay as current as I possibly can when discussing the various issues in Guyana because, well, we know, one, these things have a lifespan, but more importantly, you really want to get ahead and ensure that Guyanese are up to date on changes being made that affect their lives on a daily basis. And I think one of the hot topics at the moment right now I don't know if you've been following the news, but the police force and through the government has made some comments recently with regards to these small electric bicycles slash scooters that everyone sees all over Guyana right now. Children riding it, lots of adults doing it. It's a very cost effective, very simple method and cheap mode of transportation for many people. So what the government is looking to do now is sort of regulate that industry and that mode of transportation and implement some new rules in which they're asking for these bikes to now be registered and for riders to now have licenses. And obviously through that abide by traffic laws. So some of the comments that we've been seeing a lot of with regards to this are, when you have a device like this, a small electric scooter, and you now decide to register it, well, that theoretically now makes this mode of transportation legitimate, meaning it has rights on the roadway. So all of a sudden, it's now separated from being a bicycle, which can ride in its own separate lane, or it can go on sidewalks or ride on the shoulder of the road, to now saying, well, you are now a registered vehicle. You're paying the same money that we are to use the roads. You now have to use the correct traffic lanes. Well, between you and I feel like that's going to end up a little bit more chaotic than already exists. We already know the traffic situation in Guyana. So it's a very interesting decision to go in that direction that had come out recently, according to the police, the GPF. And again, you also have to discuss the other aspect of it, which is the fact that this mode of transportation has been now widely used because, again, it's cost effective. People that don't have enough money to buy cars or motorbikes for that matter. And again, when it comes to anyone being able to use it, much like a bicycle, it's become a very easily accessible mode of transportation. So, Guyana roadways has been a hot topic of conversation, and I'd like you to make a comparison with me now, and I guess that's the first question I'd like to ask you, on what you believe should be or could be that sort of medium, because there also is the argument that these have been very unsafe, and I assume the safety aspect is more to do with the rider than the car, because if there is a collision, it's not usually the car or that occupant that is injured, but more so the rider of the scooter. So what do you think is an interesting, or how do you feel about that sort of decision being made to register these vehicles?
It's difficult, isn't it? You see, there have been a lot of complaints. These vehicles are hard to see. Now, I drive a truck. So I can tell you from experience that if I'm sitting in the cab of a truck and I'm looking over my bonnet, those vehicles are so low that it's very easy to miss them. A bicycle, for some reason, maybe ergonomically that's how they're designed, maybe to fit the human frame, is actually higher off, so you can see a bicycle.
Right.
So with these little bikes, you can't see them, you can't hear them because they're electric, and we therefore have a problem. And you have been hearing about accidents happening. So let's start there. That there is a problem that needs a resolution if we are concerned about safety, and then take into consideration what you said, that when you look at the people who are using these vehicles, it's not your businessmen and your important entrepreneurs. They're driving their fancy vehicles. The people who are using these things are poor people who often can't even afford the minibus fare
Yeah.
every day, going to work, going home, going to the market, going back home. And I've seen a lady with two small children fitting onto these things in typical Guyana style and going down the road. And she has just saved quite a bit of money to get them to school. So they are coming in because they're cheap, and they are being bought by people who are industrious enough to realize that this is a way to help them in their poverty, that this gives them a break in terms of ongoing expenses if they bite the bullet and they pay a small sum for this bike. So as soon as you register, as soon as you insist that somebody got to register this bike, pay for registration, get it can't be a driver's license, but get some kind of license to use the thing, you are putting obstacles to what is now an easy process to help the people who are at the bottom of the financial structure. And that is where the difficulty is. Now, I like that you introduced the topic by a description of something I don't agree with. You talk about bicycles going on sidewalks and going up one ways and ignoring traffic lights and that kind of thing. So maybe we should start at what the system should be.
Okay. Fair.
Because the truth is that a bicycle, which 40 years ago was the main means of transportation in Guyana, should not break a traffic light, should not go up a one way, should not be riding on a sidewalk, and should be obeying the same traffic rules that everybody else got to obey who got a license and driving a car or a motorbike. In our lovely country, we ignore that, and that doesn't happen.
But let me challenge you for a second here, because as much as we don't obey it, let's be realistic. I mean, the roads themselves are not particularly built for people, other than car drivers to maneuver safely on them. So,
Well, Kian,
I mean,
road construction is the biggest moneymaker in Guyana, and I hope we could talk about that sometime this evening.
good.
I see Guyanese commenting about the quality of the roads and the roads breaking up and blaming the contractors. There's a long history of bad roads, of poor quality roads, and of poor maintenance of roads, and I hope we could get there because that's a huge moneymaker.
Okay.
But to get back to the topic, I think that we have to acknowledge that we drive badly. I make a conscious effort, so forgive me. I really believe if you're going to criticize, you got to start with number one. So I'll talk about me. I try my best to stop at pedestrian crossings, but I recognize that nobody else does. And often I will admit that I stop at it and I keep driving too because I'm in a hurry to get where I'm going. I also recognize that if I stop at a pedestrian crossing in a two-lane road, the other car coming behind me might not stop. And I'm creating a dangerous situation for the pedestrian who's trying to cross, as he's entitled to cross on the pedestrian crossing. We see people jumping red lights. We see people driving up on the shoulder of the road to overtake on the inside. We see people tagging on behind an ambulance or a police vehicle with a siren on, and they swing out behind and they break the traffic rules going behind those people. So we drive cars as if they are bicycles. And the question then is, who is really creating a dangerous situation? Is it these people on the little electric bicycles who really don't have much choice and are doing the best that they can? Or is it the rest of us who, as a rule, will break traffic laws and create dangerous situations when we're going down the road so as to endanger those same people?
So we're in a catch-22,
Yes.
right? Because, I mean, we're talking about, and I'm a advocate for obviously everyone to have equal rights. No matter where you stand economically, you have to be able to at least afford the luxuries or at least, have the opportunity that everyone else does to use roadways or vehicles or whatever it is that you can afford or you need to do. So we have a road system that's built, and I'm segueing into something very interesting here. We have a roadway that's built, no sidewalks. I can count literally the amount of streets in this country that have sidewalks. All right. And then you have a situation where everyone is forced to use these very minor singular roads. I mean, we watched Sheriff Street recently, billions of dollars being spent, and you're going back to the same two-lane road. Um, and then you come up with issues of, like you just said, procedure on the roads, in which, again, not to blame the drivers alone, but the reality is let's talk about something as simple as the traffic lights taking too long. I mean, though, I'm just giving a minor example of where you have a very narrow road, a single lane road. You got a traffic light that's 120 seconds long. All right. And then all of a sudden, you trying to get from point A to point B has become 10 times longer, when in actual fact, a working, structured, using, well thought out system, usable system, actually will when following the rules, as anybody who has ever traveled outside to any first world country knows, when you obey the rules, you get where you're going in the time allocated. I mean, to the point where you got things like Google Maps that can predict how fast you'll get to places.
Good.
Okay. So but in Guyana you can't do that, because it is so haphazardly done that on every single road there is another different type of issue. um, I'm going to get the reason I've brought into this road scenario as as a topic of conversation is because I've also recently read in the news that the Minister of Home Affairs has now made it clear that the government plans to alter the laws of the country in order for them to be able to select who gets police lights and sirens on their car. Now, I mean, that one was a very special one, I think, for many of us who are already horrifically annoyed that drive this road every day. But all of a sudden now, not only do we have to watch the people driving their big Prados, but now we have to watch it with police sirens for friends and family. So please, and that's my opinion, please let
Well,
me know.
yeah, that's gonna take some answering. Yeah, so please be patient because I gotta start at the beginning.
Mhm.
Um, Everybody who drives in Guyana is aware that the traffic has gotten bad. The people using the traffic have gotten worse, and you got to gird your loins in the morning when you're stepping out to drive to work, because it's going to be hell. We all know that. And we know that the roadways are insufficient for the cars, and you deal with those frustrations. What aggravates those frustrations is inevitably two, three occasions every single day when you're going to work, you hear some siren coming along, and you are required to get out of the way, drive to the corner of the road in heavy traffic to allow some vehicle to pass. No, sometimes the vehicle is an ambulance, sometimes the vehicle is a police vehicle, sometimes it's an anonymous, unmarked Land Cruiser or other car that may or may not have blue lights and red lights flashing, but has the siren. And increasingly, Guyanese are beginning to ignore it.
Mhm.
And I could tell you, speaking for myself, if it's not a police car or an ambulance, I ignore it. And I'll tell you why. The reason that you have to have respect for a vehicle with a siren is because there are circumstances in which people have to drive dangerously.
Mhm.
You and me driving to work, we have an obligation to drive safely so that we don't knock down those poor people that are driving on the little electric vehicles, right?
Right.
So we know we have to stop at the red light, we have to stay in our lane, we have to yield, we have to follow the rules of the road so that everybody can get to work safely. That is measured against the fact that we all have a right as Guyanese to travel freely without let or hindrance, which is the language of the Constitution in this country that belongs to all of us.
Mhm.
So anytime you make me get off the road to let you through first, you are interfering with my right to travel in my country without let or hindrance. And yet, so we create laws that say you must drive safely, and it is therefore a criminal offense to drive without due care and attention, and it is a more serious criminal offense to drive dangerously. And yet we know that there are occasions when you have to drive dangerously. So A policeman going to the scene of a crime has a need to get there quickly and must jump a red light. He got to drive dangerously. A fireman going to put out a fire must drive dangerously so he can get there as soon as possible and stop the fire before it's serious. And an ambulance driver with a sick person who may be dying has to get to the hospital. In those circumstances, you have a right to drive without stopping at the red light, without obeying the rules of the road to get where you're going as quickly as possible. And that is why the law talks about without just cause. So if you're driving dangerously without just cause, something is wrong. So recognizing the need for these individuals, these categories of officials to drive dangerously, Parliament said long ago, 100 years ago, let's make this thing as safe as possible by requiring them to put bright lights that are flashing and put sirens. So you hear them coming from long ago and far away, and you got time to get out the road, so that we make this dangerous situation as safe as possible.
Okay.
Now, here we are in Guyana, seeing that abused. So I personally have seen these unmarked vehicles, lights flashing, getting you out of the road, and then they turn into some school to drop off the child at school, or they turn into some police station, lights go off, and they just happen to be late for work. That is dangerous driving without just cause. That is an abuse of the power that is given to you with your flashing lights and your siren. Now, when I see that happening, I say to myself, you know, this problem is getting worse. We have people who are not authorized to be making me get off the road, driving dangerously, causing accidents, and we've seen accidents caused since the last regime when the president's guard hit somebody on the East Bank. Causing near accidents or causing accidents, creating dangerous situations when there is no justification for it because there's no emergency. Worse than that, they are aggravating an already aggravated situation because we're all crushed in traffic trying to get to work, and there's no reason to make the situation worse by making us get off the road. So I then hear that government has decided that they have seen this problem and are going to take steps. And I hear Ropes and Ben say in Parliament that they are going to tweak the legislation, not to make it an offense to use your lights and your sirens when it's not an emergency, not to talk to the police complaints authority, to have clear regulations and guidelines as to when the police can use these sirens, not to more carefully regulate it so that us ordinary people who are going to work do not feel oppressed. No. Mr. Robeson Ben says that the traffic is so heavy that they have to, quote, tweak the legislation so that they can give themselves sirens and flashing lights so that we have to get out of the way when they're late for work. So government folk, parliament folk, diplomatic folk, foreign people who come into my country
apparently
telling me I have to get out of the way
yeah.
so that they, when they're late for work, more important than me, got to get to work. You know, 600 years ago, Thomas Aquinas said that there is a duty to disobey an unfair law.
Okay.
And Guyanese have suffered oppression and unfair laws for a long time. We suffered it from the time wheat flour was banned. And Guyanese have learned that when you have a harsh government, you got to be clever. And if Guyanese consider our culture, we have a culture of avoiding laws, of avoiding bureaucracy, of hiding and doing our own thing. And the reason is that we have this kind of careless, disregard, oppressive approach to heavy-handed governance, that somebody can stand up in Parliament and casually say, we're going to tweak this thing so that I give myself the right to make you come to the corner of the road when I'm going through because I am important and you're not. Now, I have a problem with that because my answer to that is, first of all, if there's a problem on the road, so the traffic is congested and the roads don't work and they're insufficient roads, that is your fault because you're government. And if it is your fault that this traffic is so congested, then you need to give me a siren because it's not my fault, so that I have priority to get where I'm going and you must wait because it is your fault, not the other way around. So I really hope that that doesn't go through because I don't think that that is going to be well received And it is just another example of the casual disregard of our rights so as to create first class citizens and the rest of us.
Absolutely. Well said. I am waiting for the day for me to come up with the rationale or witness the event in which a minister has to be in an emergency situation to a life or death matter, as the police would attend. The word is first responder. I'm still
You've
to
seen
wait.
these boys using sirens driving to the cricket stadium when we had
That's
cricket.
right. That's
I
right.
mean, it's been
That's right.
disgraceful.
Every morning at 2:12, a small car, and they're coming up with these lights. And rather than ensure that the first responders are given the right of way, they've now determined to themselves, we are as important as those people that are put in place to save lives in this country.
When I have to get to work and I know traffic will be heavy, I take it on myself to leave early so that I can get there on time.
Mm-hmm.
I would like to persuade Mr. Ben that if he needs to get to work on time, he needs to leave early.
He can leave a little earlier. He can leave a little earlier. Yeah. If you know you have that very important meeting, which there may be one or two lives on the line, you should probably leave a little earlier. It goes right back to a very interesting theory that, and I think has been lost in Guyana, in which the government works for the people, not the people work for the government.
Whatever gave you that idea, Kian?
Yeah. And it's just a very interesting, because we watch these little things in society that I like to consider almost brainwash, because I've recently, we watched the president's outreach up in Berbice, and I'm going to talk about two very interesting things. He had helped some poorer folks, right? Some economically challenged folks, and which he given, one gentleman said he can't afford medicine, and he just ups and ran and gave him 1 year's worth of medicine. I hope he comes back within the year so this man could get more medicine next year. But nonetheless, I've been watching a lot of people praise the government for saying, wow, it's so great that you gave this donation. As a matter of fact, I've watched a banner recently on one of the houses that this men on a mission program donated to a family. And underneath it had in bold red writing, donated by the government of Guyana. Well, I like to try and be as clear as possible. I don't think a lot of people realize that the government doesn't actually have any money. I don't, they're not they're not actually the money that any of them earn or are paid comes from taxpayers. Meaning, if you were to try and be as accurate as possible with those types of signs, it should probably say donated by the people of Guyana, the ones that are actually paying, right?
There's a lovely saying that says if you are going to be charitable out of your own pocket.
Right. And funny enough, it's the taxpayers that are paying them into their pocket. Mm-hmm. So even if nonetheless, that's their elected position. I watched a slogan the other day. It said, "There's no such thing as government funded. It's all taxpayer funded." Right? It's not a real thing. Nonetheless, what has been a very interesting spin-off of this this recent, and I guess I can argue previously, but more so in the news and what has been publicized, was the government and through the president has been doing lots of charity work, if you will, in which he's been using taxpayers' dollars to build houses for people, and he's been using taxpayer dollars to donate medicine or motorbikes or this and that. And all of a sudden, there's been this large spring up of people and scenarios in which you found people going, whether using their phone on their personal Facebook, or whether appealing to the news, or whether showing up at State House if they want, in which they have been begging and pleading and saying, I'm in a dire situation. Can I please help? And what we've been watching occur is a very worrisome situation for someone like me, because I'm watching a very a very biased and non-protocol or procedure-like circumstances in which the government is picking and choosing who they are helping. So obviously, as we know, if this is not something that's available to all Guyanese, it is then a form of corruption, if you will, right?
I
Because
wouldn't I
you
wouldn't hasten to call it corruption. I think
go ahead,
I think we got
please.
to try to be fair about this.
Uh-huh.
First of all, the president has demonstrated an energy
Mm-hmm.
that you can only admire.
Mm.
This one has gotten all over the country. He's gone international. He has reached out, and he is the consummate politician. He is a likable man. I like him.
Mm-hmm.
Um, he is down to earth. He is practical, and you have to give him credit for that. And I think his heart is in the right place. So let us acknowledge all of that first. And with the energy he has, he is all over the country demonstrating these qualities and showing it. The criticism that I think can be made, and I think that you are going there, but I wanted to separate it from a discussion of the individual holding the office, is systems.
Mm-hmm.
You see, the reality is that Guyana's economy now is booming, although the critics will say we're not seeing the money filtering down to the less fortunate, and that is true. But at this stage, the economy is booming and money is circulating, and the critical element now that is necessary is how do we get that boom to filter down to the people at the bottom who really need it. And that, I think, is where the government is not succeeding. You see, the government's policy and the fact that their supporters have most of the wealth in the first place means that we are bullish. There is optimism, there is trading, there is money circulating, we're seeing it. What the government has also realized is there's got to be a way to get cash to the less fortunate. But how the government has done it in the short term had an immediate effect. So you had education cash handouts, you had farmers cash handouts, you had Gaisuko retirees cash
Fisherman.
handouts, you had the fishermen cash handouts. Now, all of these get money into the economy, but they are not systematic. And there was on Facebook the other day some comment about a lady who had her house broke down, a very poor lady, and she had children, and there was a hue and cry about it. And the government went and gave her a new house. Now, that sounded good. And everybody said, kudos to the government, well done. But I want to say to you that in Guyana, you have 400,000 more poor people. So when you extricate one and you say, here you are, $3 million house for you, go and be happy, you've actually been unfair to the other 299,000.
Right.
It needs to be a system that is transparent, that everybody can access. So insofar as you want to give education handouts, I believe that every child born in Guyana should, when he is born, have a TIN number, which is the equivalent of your US Social Security number. That TIN number should be used as he grows up for his car license, his tax identification, his NIS. It should identify him or her. What that means is that when you know that this TIN number one for child number one is 4 years old, that child is going to school. And that child's mother is entitled quarterly, every 3 months, to go into NIS and collect a sum of money, which is the equivalent of a cash handout. But it is now an entitlement. It is a system.
Right.
When that TIN number one, that child number one, reaches 16, automatically that child that number is registered for NIS, and the number is put on the GRA's radar for tax purposes. If the child isn't working at 16, automatically you will get an unemployment benefit.
Right.
As soon as you start working, automatically you are required to start declaring and paying your taxes.
Right.
So that you don't have a situation where more than half of the employment force is beneath the radar and not on the system at all. If you do that, when that child is at the school age, a transparent system enables the mother, and I say the mother deliberately, to get quarterly money from NIS as part of the system that encourages her to keep the child in school, because she got to show when she goes for her money that the child is in school. And you are then in a position to holistically care for that child in the education system by providing sports, providing extracurricular activities, encouraging that, feeding that child, providing something so that the poor in the society can reliably, safely, happily feel safe that their child is well educated and that the education level is equal for all.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you start with that, so that each Guyanese from birth has this number, you have transparency throughout. And you therefore don't have to have a situation where a minister is going into some location to get a photo opportunity, hand in cash to some poor parent, usually of the other race,
Mm-hmm.
because we got to show that this is, one Guyana.
Right.
And nobody is asking how much money it costs for this minister to reach in there. What about the security detail? What about the hotel and accommodation and food for this minister to go for this photo op?
Right.
And isn't that minister really expected to be serving Guyana better, sitting at his or her desk in the ministry, doing real work at a managerial level? Because when you handing out an envelope, any clerk, any clerical level person can do that. We got to stop playing politics and talk about systems that work. So that is the first way to get money injected into the society at the level of the people who need it.
That actually lends back to your conversation about residency in our last conversation as well.
It does.
Yeah.
We got to talk about pensions.
Yeah.
Now, you want money injected into society. Old age pension cannot be what it is. Mm-hmm. It got to be doubled or tripled.
I think that is the biggest, probably one of the most hurtful aspects of the budget this year. It only raised by what, 2,000?
The minimum wage got to be double what it is.
Yeah.
So that is how you inject money into the society at a way that is systemic. If you want to start passing draconian laws, your laws must be that if you're an employer who has employed people and you are not paying their NIS, the fines should be in the millions of dollars and there should be jail time. Mm-hmm. Let's deal with it that way.
Yeah.
Don't let's pretend that everything is okay when we know that people are off the system and are not benefiting, so that they are destitute and poor, and by the time they pass work age, there is no provision for them except the $30,000 wage benefit. Let us sort out our systems rather than going to hand out arbitrary money as if we're the sovereign, dropping gold coins for the masses to pick up.
Let them eat cake.
Let them eat cake.
There you go. So that carries me into another interesting news clip that was in the papers today, in which in Parliament, our Minister of Health had another proclamation in which, as we know, there is a large shortage of professional personnel in our public service system and dwindling rapidly, meaning our nurses, our doctors, engineers, professional capacity people. One of them, main one, obviously one of the backbone, teachers, is another one dwindling. But one of the backbones, much like teachers of our society, are our nurses. And our minister recently in Parliament proclaimed that they are implementing a new online nursing program in which they are going to be training 1,000 nurses per year using this online method. Once they go through their stint of online learning, they are then brought into the hospitals. They are then put into their residency, their practical side of their work, and then let loose on into the system. They're going to become registered nurses, and every year we're going to be cranking out 1,000 of these nurses. This was a very interesting topic for me. I'm going to just divulge a little bit, because I'm going to give you I'll give you your chance to address all the various scenarios. It has been looked at as a solution to a problem, or a proposed solution for a problem that they themselves have created. Why I say that is, I think the first question that needs to be addressed is, why are we losing teachers, doctors, nurses, and professional people in our public system, right? I think that needs to be the first question. Why is that happening? And what they've done here is they've proposed that we are going to solve, without addressing the problem, they've proposed a solution to inject more. We know as we know what we know about the public employment situation, their payment scales, their benefits or lack thereof, their working conditions, and all in all, um, a large part of the reason why these nurses and doctors and professional teachers are and so are leaving. Um, it is being looked at right now as another aspect, another version of brain drain here in Guyana. So I'd like to ask you your opinion on what may be a potential solution and to address a situation like this. If you were a parliamentarian yourself, if you were in government in that particular situation, what do you think may be a solution or some sort of strategy to combat this type of situation?
Interested. Okay. So a new regime of education has been touted, an online nursing course. Now, I'll tell you something, if I don't know, I don't know. And I am not qualified to comment on what is a suitable nursing course and what is not. Okay? So I'm not going to go there. But for me, if you can show that you have accreditation by an international university or an international organization, that these nurses will be recognized as RNs in the States or in England, I'm good with that.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So the first thing is some kind of international accreditation. If you get in some certificate that is meaningless, that this person cannot go anywhere in this world and hold up that certificate and say, give me a job, then you're really fooling folks. So the first thing I would ask is it internationally accredited? And if it is, good.
Mm-hmm.
It has my support. The second aspect of the problem that you discussed is the migration. And this takes us back to the two subjects that I'm on all the time, which is oppression and corruption. So with the system that we have, where the minimum wage is still less than $100,000, and a new nurse still earns very close to that minimum wage, the reality is that any nurse who is qualified is going to have an opportunity to go abroad and will go abroad. Now, Guyana got 700,000 people, 750,000. That's a drop in the ocean. And the number of nurses who are qualified in Guyana can get absorbed into the national health system in England or into the national health system in Canada like that, without them even noticing. And let me tell you, the national health system in England is woefully short of nurses. And right now, we can get to England visa free. And nurses have been lining up to get the required medicals to get visas because they are being offered jobs in England.
Mm-hmm.
Why are they going? They're going because they're getting $500 here, and they will get 3-4 times that in England after expenses are paid. So there's no choice. There's no option here. It's an easy decision to make. The first chance they get, they're gone. How do we solve the problem? By raising the minimum wage, by recognizing our professionals and paying our teachers, our nurses, our police, paying them, our public servants, so that they can have a dignified lifestyle with self-respect, and the lifestyle that they have will enable them to pay their mortgage, to buy their car, to go on a vacation every year or every 2 years. If you are not doing that for your teachers, if you're not doing that for your police and your nurses, you're not being just, you're not being fair to the people that you have a responsibility to.
It's an interesting comment because again, unless you are elevating those people, as you just said, to self-sustenance, to live a respectable life, to not be dependent on the government, then the truth of the matter is that you could train 10,000 nurses you want a year. All of a sudden, we can have a lot more nurses, Guyanese nurses around the world, right? Because again, you're not addressing the problem that is being created already. So, it's one of those areas that I had looked at, and it's one of the many headlines that you're reading that are being touted as, hard work that we're doing, when it's actually an issue that they have created, and now we're coming up with a plaster over the top to say, look, we actually working hard. Here's a online program to fulfill the void that we have created, right? Nonetheless, I'm just on another note, and I think this is very interesting because we spoke about migration. They had done the 2022 migration report for around the world, and they had done the calculation for Guyana, only to realize that 16.6 people per every 1,000 citizens here are leaving, are migrating out of the country to other places, whether it be regional or internationally, but nonetheless leaving Guyana. And that is within the top 10 in the world. So we have, again, at this point in time, in 2022, a government that was sworn in 2020, screaming progress and moving forward. We are still in the top 10 in the world for migration.
16.6 out of every 1,000.
16.6 people out of every 1,000 people in this country are leaving.
And this is every year?
Per year.
So when you multiply that by 700,000, a lot of people are going every year.
A lot of people. Well, again, it's been touted as another brain drain because it is mostly professionals. Because obviously, as the world needs more labor, as you just mentioned in England, you're watching them scream day in and day out that they have shortages. Canada just opened a whole opportunity for teachers to go abroad there, giving them work permits and saying, please come, etc., etc.
Well, I think that's an important point you made, because when you look at the immigration policies of these countries, and the states who used to say, give us your poor, no longer saying that.
No, give us your qualified.
Give us your qualified. Their visa requirements and what the people that they encourage to come to immigrate into their countries are the people who have qualifications.
Mm-hmm.
And that means that the brain drain is no longer just a label. It's a real thing. It's a formalized thing.
Mm-hmm.
Because they're saying, keep your unqualified, keep your people who haven't gone to high school, who are not educated. But if you got somebody with a degree, if you got somebody with experience, we're taking them.
Yeah.
And that is very dangerous. Mm-hmm. And if it's 16 out of 1,000 times 700,000,
mm-hmm. It's pretty close to all our qualified people per year.
I'll tell you something. Again, you have to start with number one. Of 9 children of my father's generation, 8 migrated. And of 3 children that my father had, 2 migrated. I'm the only one left.
I have 4 in my family, and I'm the only one here.
And I would challenge Guyanese to look at their families. Guyanese who have a degree or have a profession, have a trade, mm-hmm. who are self-sufficient. Look at your families and count how many are in Guyana, how many have left, and ask why. And ask if we are doing the right thing and if we should keep doing what we're doing, or if we need to change and identify where the problems lie.
I think another comment there to make in that thought process as people is to also tell yourself, if you have realized, if you are one of the few people that have realized that most of your family are here as qualified people, you then ask yourself, well, if they had the opportunity to leave, would they? Because we know that is probably the biggest hindrance of people migrating out of the country. But most people qualified are easily given opportunities now, as we've spoken about already.
Well,
to head out.
I'll tell you, if you're sitting in somewhere in Hartford, Connecticut, and you say you use the expression backtrack, no one will know what you're talking about. Yeah. But if you use the expression backtrack in Guyana, nobody has any doubt what you're talking about. So it shows a difference in priority and a difference in where our focus is.
What an interesting concept. Something as simple as that, right?
As simple as that.
When over there, they're worried about people trying to break into the country. And we got people trying to break out. Yeah. Okay, fair.
With good leadership, that will change.
With good
leadership. Good leadership, with our resources, that can change very quickly.
Very well. Again, 700,000 people. I like to say we're a village anywhere else in the world.
Yeah.
All right. This is not a large population. So with the conversation of resources benefiting people, another hot topic right now, hot topic in the media is a recent interview was done with the country head of ExxonMobil in Guyana, and he spoke about 2 very interesting topics that seem to have taken over the conversation. The first one being Exxon is currently building $160 million office building at Ogle, and during his press conference, he said that $160 million for that building is cost recoverable, meaning that money will be taken out of the oil money as an expense, and then the profit will then be divvied up as it is. The next aspect that he touched on, and pick or choose how you want to discuss them, um, is the very largely touted natural gas power plant that the government is currently promoting and spending large amounts of money on. I'd like to make mention that this project, from its conceptualization maybe 2 years ago, started at about 700 million US, slowly went to 900, jumped to about 1.3 million US. So 1.3 billion US, sorry, 700 million US, 900 million US, 1.3 billion US dollars. Yeah. And now we are well on our way past 2 billion US dollars. We've watched this project without having seen any plans to the public so far, other than some very beautiful images of architectural drawings. No feasibility, no write-ups. We've heard that that this plant now will cut electricity costs in half because um, because the gas, and again through our vice president's press conferences, is virtually free for us, because it has not been mentioned. It's one of those things that that Exxon is not utilizing themselves, so they will just be giving it to us. During the country manager's press conference, he has now made it clear that they are building the pipeline, and they will then be charging Guyana for the natural gas to recover their expenses. I want to make also a slight mention that when this natural gas power plant was first spoken about, we were going to be paying 30% of our current price on gas costs. As the cost of the project went up, we are now in and around 50% is the touted number, that we're going to be paying half as much for electricity. You actually at one point your power situation. Nonetheless, um, before we get into the GPL scenario, that is what we've been discussing as issues that we are now facing with Guyana when it comes to benefiting from resources and contracts shrouded in secrecy. What's your take on this in the recent?
I think this may be the largest potential problem that Guyana is facing. On a short term, when a lot of money is being spent, it boosts the economy. So people hear about this large project and it's going forward, and it creates optimism, and land prices go up, and property ventures and investors and all of that come sniffing around, and it's all good. But I want to get past that, and I want to look at the concept of a gas to shore project and what it means for us. Mm-hmm. Now, when Guyana negotiated with Exxon their exploration contract, we didn't know anything about the petroleum extraction business. We didn't do anything about the oil business. When Exxon found commercial quantities of oil and negotiated with us, and we signed this $18 million bonus, and we signed the oil production contract, we still did not know anything about the oil business. So when people said, oh, we only getting that much money, we need to renegotiate. And I was challenged about it. What's your view on renegotiation? I remember somebody argumentatively asking me. We don't know anything about it. Mm-hmm. And I would challenge anybody listening to us. If you're getting 50%, is that a good deal or a bad deal? And I think anyone honest with themselves would say they don't know. My problem is that I believe that the members of government still don't know. And that's where the problem is. Nothing was wrong if you didn't know 10 years ago or 5 years ago. I suspect something is wrong now if you haven't brought yourself up to speed. And I believe we do not have enough expertise where we need it. And that is why there's that deafening silence in terms of where we are, what we can do, and what the arrangements now are. And in the face of that lack of knowledge, lack of information, lack of transparency, we are told 1.4 billion with a B on this gas to shore project that Exxon is participating in. Now, as someone who has to admit, I don't know. I don't know if 50% is good or bad. I don't know if 1.4 is a good price or not. My litmus test that common sense tells me is that if I could find a private investor willing to do it, it's going to make money. Because a private investor is not going to spend his own money unless he knows something about it and he has a reasonable expectation he's going to make $1 on a return. There's no private investors in this project. For me, that calls
That's
alarms
correct.
bells.
That's
Right?
correct.
That causes problems in my mind immediately as someone who is just looking speculative.
Just to stick a pin for 1 second on that, just to let you know, the ABC countries have all washed their hands of this. Many of them are on board currently, and as we've seen in the press with the Amelia Falls Hydro Project, willing to fund it. The IDB, the IMF, and other organizations have said, yes, we will help go ahead with that. But there's a reason that the Guyanese taxpayers are funding this project by themselves.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned Amelia Falls because I was going to go there.
Okay.
You see, a project might be a feasible project, but if it doesn't have the support of the opposition, then you run into problems as soon as the government changes or as soon as the opposition gets a majority in parliament. Now, Amelia Falls may have been a good project. It may not have been well implemented in terms of building the road and running the transmission system, because if you got generation of electricity 100 miles away, you need 100 miles of wiring to get it to where you live so you could get electricity.
The distribution.
So that transmission and distribution system might have been a problem. But the concept was there, but there was no discussion with opposition. And therefore, as soon as the AFC got the majority in parliament, the project was starved and it collapsed. I do not see input from the opposition in the gas to shore. And I keep saying, the government that represents half of this country cannot pretend that it must have monopoly dictatorial powers and make decisions like that for the entire country. It is common sense and it is good governance to include the opposition so that a consensus can be reached.
And you can have some continuity if government changes or...
We're not seeing that.
Yeah.
No. So in the absence of consultation, there is a threat. In the absence of real feasibility and transparency, we have another example besides Amelia Falls to look back to, which is Skeldon. Now, Skeldon is in an industry that we're supposed to know about, sugar, because we've been doing sugar for 150 years. And yet, we spent taxpayers' money to put up, at enormous cost, a sugar-producing factory that never worked. Was there consultation? Was there feasibility? Was there expertise? Was there competence? Right now, Gaisuko is in so much trouble, I don't know if it's going to last another 5 years, even with all the subsidization.
No, it will, because they're subsidizing it every single budget.
But if 10 years ago, the people who are now building a gas to shore project built Skeldon, and no private investor is willing to come to lend a hand and put their money and say they're taking the risk, alarm bells continue to go off in my head. And the last thing now is, as you say, I have some background in sources of energy and in how these things work. Our generators run on heavy diesel. So GPL runs on heavy diesel. A lot of the large companies in Guyana that were fed up with the intermittent service they got from GPL and are now self-generating, they generate on heavy diesel. If you want to convert to natural gas as a means of generation, you got to change your machinery. Not just change your machinery. You got to find a way to transport the natural gas from that single location in Wales, where apparently it will be made, to go to Essequibo, to go to Berbice, to go up the East Bank, to go to Kokwani, to go to Lethem. Now, we have spent 100 years evolving a transmission and distribution system so that we have wiring running to Berbice, we have wiring running to Essequibo, but we have independent generation plants at Garden of Eden, up the East Bank, in Kokwani, in Linden. We have independent places because geographically we are so large. Which one of these generation points will be transformed and the equipment changed to natural gas? All of them? One of them? how much natural gas will we be producing so as to service these new generation points that we are servicing? Nobody knows. And it's the best kept national secret in the country, as far as I can see. But there isn't a private investor that's taking the neck out for it.
So,
Alarm bells.
so potential
Let us wait
taxpayers'
and see.
money gone to Skeldon that's wasted, taxpayers, billions of dollars that was used in Amelia Falls, and now potentially billions of dollars once again because of a lack of consultation.
And at the end of the day, I have to say, I don't know about oil and gas, but my fear is neither do they.
Right. All right. On that note, Mr. Jonas, we are at our time limit. You know, we can sit here for hours, right? And I'm gonna hope to have you again on very soon because I know there are lots more. We didn't even get to talk about the infrastructure projects.
No, we didn't.
That-
Maybe another day. But
Yeah.
before we close off, I want to acknowledge that you now have Kian's Apolitically coffee mugs. A good development. I assume
Progression.
it was bought out of your own pocket and not with government funds.
No,
I don't
no.
see a sign that says government funded.
Yeah, I promise you, if it's taxpayer, it will say taxpayer funded. The government doesn't have any money. So, on that note, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Jonas, thank you again for being here with us. We are here every Friday from 6:30 p.m. to 7:30 p.m. And we have lots more interesting topics and lots more interesting guests. I recently had an interesting conversation with an EPA representative that I've asked to come on the show soon, which, you know, lots of different situations around the country. Again, getting back to professional criticism and expertise in the country. So we have lots more to talk about soon. And I hope everyone can join us here. Please follow our page. Mr. Jonas has his Facebook page. I myself, personal Kian Jabour, our 8th political page, you know, and then you'll be able to know how to contact us with any questions because we like to get some feedback from you guys. So on that note, thank you again for joining us, and we will be back here next week, Friday, same time, same place.
Thanks for having me, Kian.